My name is Marion Jansen. I'm the Chief Economist of the International Trade Center, and I'm very pleased to moderate this panel. I'm very uncomfortable with this delay. My nationality is German, and we have the reputation to be punctual. Now, that's actually not the reputation I have, but 20 minutes is a lot. But it has been worthwhile your wait, because I think we have a fantastic panel here. A fantastic panel also for a forum like this one organized by ICTSD, with a mix of representatives from the public sector, from government, from the private sector, and from academia, and from three, if you include me and Arancha, 4 continents. So I think that's as far as you can get in terms of diversity, with 7 seats on the podium. So I thank all the panelists for being here to discuss this theme, e-commerce, and I call them MSMEs, but many call them MSMEs, towards more inclusive trade. This is a topic very close to the heart of ITC. ITC's work focuses on helping SMEs to engage in international trade, and the theme of e-commerce has become a theme that we think we have to engage with, and that has to play an important role in our work. Now, when it comes to inclusiveness of e-commerce, there are these different views. Many of us, and definitely at ITC, we believe e-commerce provides great opportunities for SMEs and can help them to engage in international trade. And if small and medium-sized enterprises, more of them engage in international trade will end up being more inclusive. So e-commerce, good for inclusiveness. But hold on, some will say, there is this thing called the digital divide. So maybe in theory there are fantastic opportunities, but in practice there will be a lot of obstacles and a lot of problems, and maybe this inclusiveness will never happen. So I hope maybe from this panel to get some views about what obstacles are and how they can be overcome. Another inclusiveness theme, very close again to ITC's heart, including women in international trade. We find in our surveys that female-owned enterprises are much more present in e-driven trade and e-commerce than in traditional trade. So again, e-commerce as a potential tool to make trade more inclusive for women. But then when you look at who is learning how to program, how to write algorithms, how to become an IT engineer, there we see still traditional patterns of male students being predominant in universities. So maybe not that inclusive e-commerce. So I've thrown the big questions into the room, and I look forward to get your takes on these questions. We will follow an order that is slightly different than on the panel, and we will start with some views from the private sector, then from academia, and then I said to Minister Sarr and Minister Mora, I will give you the floor because you are supposed to find solutions to all these problems that we hear. Please welcome with me Mr. François Martin, very French name, but I was told Brazilian working in Argentina, is that right? So very international, and working with a company called Mercado Libre that is also trying to find solutions for some of the obstacles to more inclusive trade, but from a private sector approach. So please give us your take on these questions.
Vielen Dank. I wanted to thank ITC for the invitation and for giving Mercado Libre the opportunity to express some of our views about this issue that it seems no one is taking the steps toward actually discussing, except just discussing. I wanted to talk to you, tell you a bit about this company that was founded in 1999 in a garage here in Buenos Aires, 1999. I've been told that the last document signed in the WTO regarding e-commerce was in 1998, so 1 year before Mercado Libre was founded. Since then, we have evolved from a company that allows persons, people, mostly in the beginning, single persons to sell used things at a variable price, not fixed price. And now we have a 90 to 95% fixed price on all products sold on our platform, and a same percentual is of new things, never used things. We have close to 200 million users across Latin America, half of that in Brazil, which is our largest market. The largest part of our revenue comes from that country as well, but it is an Argentine company that has spread across 18 countries in Latin America and one in Europe, Portugal. And today we have an estimate population that lives out of selling things on Mercado Libre on our platforms across Latin America that is around 350,000 families. So those have 100% of their revenues, or the most significant part of that revenue, their household revenue, coming from selling things on Mercado Libre. That's 111,000 people. That's an estimate in Brazil alone. So it would be the equivalent of a medium city in countries like France in Europe, right? What are the bottlenecks that we see? And I'll use this question as an alibi to talk to you about the history of this company. So it was founded as a place where people could sell things and buy things, period, right? And suddenly we noticed that it wasn't enough. People needed help paying things. People needed help sending things. People needed help posting their products online, posting the photos. So people needed help, period. That wasn't so automatic as we thought. And please hold on to that thought, because being automatic and thinking that some things are taken for granted is sometimes what we observe in the discussions that we may have around e-commerce. So please hold on to that. And with that, each time we identified a bottleneck, we would develop a new business unit to address it. So now we have 8 business units. So a lot of trouble have been encountered in that journey. But the main business units are Mercado Pago, which addresses e-payments, and not only in the platform, but also outside of the platform. So we're helping people who are not actually selling anything on our platform receive their payment. We're helping people buy stuff outside of our platform as well. We have Mercado Envíos. Mercado Envíos is a logistic BU that helps address the logistical problem. You know, in this region, we have logistical companies that have strong ties to the public sector, and the public sector has not been able to make them evolve in the way that e-commerce would need them to evolve. We also have a very recent BU that is called Mercado Créditos. Mercado Créditos is designed to give access to financing. So you have a seller that needs capital to get his or her business going, thriving, growing, hire people, buy things, buy inventory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that money was not available because the size of the business is too small, et cetera. So we have developed a new BU to address that. Why we do this? We really want the transaction to flow. The transaction must not be a burden, must flow. For that, all the bottlenecks that sellers, buyers, and those who don't sell or buy anything, all the bottlenecks these people face must be addressed. And why am I mentioning people who don't sell or buy anything? Those people are the largest part of our users. They go online, they look for something, they look for prices, they look for where the good is coming from, how expensive will the logistics be, etc. And those people are a very large number. We have today around 30 million unique buyers, and 10 million unique sellers. The rest of the 200 million is just users who go online.
Thank you very much for that. We hear from these bottlenecks, some of the bottlenecks we come across we have come across in our work. We divide them in 4 areas, not 8. So maybe we may have been underestimating the problems. We make the difference between going online, e-payment, getting produce across the border, and then serving your client after sales. But definitely the payment issues that you also emphasized is something we have come across a lot. So very interesting for us to hear that there are private sector solutions to this, and we will be interested to talk more about that. With this, I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Kapuria. He comes from India. He has different affiliations, but I will say this one, high-tech gears. So if you come from India, we know the country's reputation when it comes to ICT, and work for a company called high-tech gears, then our expectations are high, nearly as bad as punctuality in Germany. So please, what is your experience in your region with these issues we have heard about and that are being discussed today and in the coming days here in Buenos Aires in the context of the WTO?
All right, thank you. First and foremost, thank you so much. It seems that I seem to be on the panels one way or the other. It was just about 6 weeks back that I was on a panel of ITC in Budapest, and speaking about certain other issues of GVCs and RVCs. And here I am in Buenos Aires talking about the competitiveness vis-a-vis SMEs and how e-commerce is really helping them engage in businesses. So thank you very much for having me. Obviously, our company is not an SME by any standards. However, I'm representing the larger aspect as the Confederation of Indian Industries, where 70% of membership is SMEs. And I think SMEs have become on the forefront of each economy, whether it's a developed economy or an economy which is developing economy. Somehow, they're the ones who are actually creating jobs. The larger enterprises, and I see within ourselves also, are evolving in a way that many times we are reducing the workforce. And the job creation is actually being done by the small and medium companies. Given that, I think today there is a divergence of the agenda of trade and job creation. And thus it becomes an imperative to promote the SME agenda. And when you're promoting the SME agenda, and particularly to make the political agenda also aligned, and thus creating an inclusive society, because at the end of the day, we are all hearing that somehow trade has not percolated down to the last populace, and thus it's even creating an issue whether it's the most developed country. So here is an opportunity where not only the digitization, the way it has happened, of course there is a differential over the world, but nevertheless, digitization, and what's the major driver of this is you have now sensors which are so cheap, and you have storage which is literally free, like the iCloud or the cloud, you can store anything, and you have huge computers doing analytics. So given that, and churning data is now available to even the smallest of enterprise, not only the smallest of enterprises, but also to an individual. And that has been realized by the government in India. And there's a major drive of digitization which is happening to bridge this issues, and India is a continent in itself, if you see, just the population. So we are going through this transformation phase where we are enabling the enterprises and the smaller companies to engage. And the way we are doing it is to engage the service providers. So Google is a service provider, a large service provider, who is readily getting engaged. Microsoft is getting engaged. So are the others like Cisco, etc., are getting engaged to enable the smaller enterprises to do business. So while the data is getting churned out, the marketplace is getting aligned to the smaller entities to know where the demand is. And if the demand and the supply somehow get in sync, obviously the businesses get created. Given that, we also have a huge IDC competence within our country, and there are not only research and the various algorithms which are getting created, which are enabling, again, however, there is obviously a lot which needs to get done. And that is, of course, logistics is an issue which needs improvement. Facilitation in terms of regulation and policy needs improvement. But at least the direction is set. So there is a directional thing to say that let's all the stakeholders get together, where it's the consumers, the producers, which are small entities, and the policymakers and the regulators to come out with engaging so that the enterprises reduce their cost of not only compliance, but also the cost of transactions, which make them competitive. Because unless you're competitive, and today in a global world, you're not going to sell. I mean, the consumer can buy anything from across the world. If you have an Amazon platform going and you have Alibaba's of the world and local grown platforms like we have in India, Flipkart and others, you can literally do a competitive and buy anything that you want to. So that's, I think, the challenge which the enterprises will face. And to make them competitive is possibly a task which not only the policymakers have. So I think ITC did a great job in the two studies. I remember the study that was, you unfolded in Budapest, talking about the competitiveness in certain areas and how to engage in the regional supply chains and the value chains. And here also that how you leverage e-commerce to engage more in the global world. So I think while enumerating this, I think the critical issue of transformation is to be reducing the cost of compliances. And that's where the policy space comes in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for making reference to ITC's work on SME competitiveness, where we have, in particular, also with a special survey looked at competitiveness in e-commerce recently. You made, Mr. Kapuria, reference to services providers. You mentioned a number of household names. Some of them, you mentioned also Alibaba, come from China, and it gives me the opportunity to pass the floor to our next speaker, Mr. Zhao, Director of the China Center for International Development at the Nankai University. Mr. Zhao, your country is, the private sector, very active in this area. My daughters, I can tell you, do buy from Alibaba, which is something that would have been unimaginable for me when I had their age. So when you think of e-commerce, inclusiveness, SMEs, what would be your take on this topic and on the points that you have heard so far?
Thank you, as you talked, Alibaba is now is very famous, not only in China but in the world. In fact, Alibaba really has played a very important role to promote the e-commerce, as well. E-commerce has played more and more important role in to promote the traditional trade into inclusive trade. Why? E-commerce first provides the opportunity for the medium and small enterprises, because managing a company, at least including the production and the marketing, two very important sectors. Due to the e-commerce, the small company, they can produce even the very small scale and to accumulate it together to marketing by e-commerce companies. So Alibaba has played a very important role to help the small companies to go to the big market. The second one, e-commerce also provides the opportunity for the rural area and the remote area, because in China, at the very beginning, the rich area is just in the big city and along the east coast area, because that is the tradable area. In the west, at the inner line, they have few opportunities to trade directly with the international market. Relatively, it's a poor area. Now, the situation changed, because even the inner area, they now need to move the labor to the east coast area to earn higher wages. They can produce the product at home, so reduce the rural surplus move. They just can make the production at their home, so improve the rural development. The third one, I think the e-commerce also provides the opportunity for the poor people. The poor people, the lack of the funding service. So if they want to produce their products like the handmade product, the lack of the fund, because they have a very small scale. Now, even the one-piece product, if you valuable, they can sell to the big market through the e-commerce service. So the e-commerce really has played a very important role to promote the traditional trade into inclusive trade. Another one, China will celebrate the 40 years anniversary for their reform and opening up policies next year. During the last 40 years, China has made very successful stories in the economic development. However, their development still is not balanced, equal. They have different people, they benefit some more, some people benefit less. However, through the e-commerce will improve this situation. As well, mostly significant is to improve the rural situation. They can improve the wealth accumulation with the cities. So some people may be interested. There is a small town in China. The name is Yiwu. Yiwu before is the small town. They just sell some handmade product. Now through the e-commerce, they sell their product not only in China but around the world. 30% product is moved to the international market. So the e-commerce is very important. I think with the time going, the e-commerce will play more important role for the rural development. Of course, there are some issues facing this situation. Maybe I'll discuss later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for these points, and also for mentioning a very important third type of inclusiveness. I had mentioned small firms versus large firms, women-owned companies versus male-owned companies. You mentioned rural versus city, regional differences, and the role e-commerce can have there in reducing the inequalities. It is my great pleasure to pass to the next speaker now, Minister Mora from Costa Rica. A pleasure to have you on this panel, notably because of the role Costa Rica plays in Geneva as one of the leaders of the Friends for E-commerce for Development. Your government has played an important role in facilitating, driving the discussion on e-commerce for development. And I'm therefore very interested and very thankful also that you're willing to contribute to this debate here today.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to the ITC. Arancha and your team, you are doing a great job in representing SMEs in different fields, not only in e-commerce. But allow me to start by expressing a very general concept that I would like to share. When I heard François sharing us the experience of how Mercado Libre grew up, I think there is something behind that description that is important to highlight. The raw material of the digital economy is data. You can have a good product, physical product, but even if you have a very good product, you know, something that you can sell using conventional channels or new channels like e-commerce, your business there, when you go to e-commerce, relies on managing the data. If you don't have a product that is physical product, and you have knowledge, you have services, you have intangible goods or services, data is, again, very important. In many cases, data is the product or the service, but in all cases, data is what gives you the most important input in this e-commerce paradigm, if I can use that word. So the only way for us to truly take advantage of the digital economy is by trading data. Whether you like it or not, the discussion of e-commerce is going to end in the discussion of how we treat data, how we trade data, and what rules apply to data. And of course, and I think it's too early for WTO probably to jump in. It's too early for us to expect that the WTO will come up with a solution, with an output. I think this is still job to do. But we need to start the discussion. We need to start understanding the new issues. So after saying that, you know, from the experience I have in my country, first 25 years as entrepreneur in the digital sector, then just 4 years back, accepting the proposition by President to join his cabinet and being in charge of foreign trade in a country where the most dynamic part of the economy has to do with the digital sector. And the only country that joined the ITA back in 1995, the only developing country that decided to join ITA. And many people said, but why Costa Rica decided to join ITA if Costa Rica is an agricultural country? Yes, we were an agricultural country those days, but we saw the potential of using it as a transformation. Just like now, we are using ITA 2, the updated ITA, because now we have a very strong industry in, for example, medical devices or electronics that is moving into certification. So all this new paradigm where you cannot truly divide the industry and the service, the good and the service, it's there. And it's been very hard for us to understand the dynamics of this transformation and becoming a country where almost 70% of our exports have high-tech component, where we moved from having an 18% value add in our exports back in 1998 to a country that has 63 value add in exports today. So this transformation, which is a very structural transformation, has to do with how we were able to allow private sector to reform our internal rules, to adapt our internal economy, our local market, into and align the local market with the free trade. I have the sense that in many cases, a significant part of the complaints that we hear from many sectors in many countries about free trade not functioning for them, not delivering for them, has to do with the lack of internal reforms. Because it's not enough just to sign WTO agreement. You have to come and apply that. You have to come and analyze your economy and see how you can take advantage of what you have done in the foreign trade sector. So, only by aligning these two worlds, you can probably expect results. And I think that that's exactly the same situation that SMEs or MSMEs have. Here, I have a discrepancy because I don't think that the issue of SMEs has to do with how competitive they are. I think that it has to do with how productive they are. Because, the big discussion in many countries is productivity. There is where we are failing a lot. And public policy is not focusing on productivity. And I think that there is a huge area where public policy can come and help companies. If you are not productive, e-commerce will not be the solution. So you have to have the two sides. This is exactly the same thing that I explained about Costa Rica. Costa Rica was able, in the same rules, Costa Rica took much better advantage of free trade than other countries because we took initiatives to reform our internal economy. And yes, it was painful. It was painful. But you cannot just expect to have the best of the worlds. It doesn't work that way.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Though a bit sobering end, e-commerce is not a magical bullet. You have to have an offering, you have to have a business plan, you have to have a product that sells also in order to sell via e-commerce. And very sobering, even if we have outcomes here in Buenos Aires, the work only starts after that, if I understood your message well, and has to be continued at home. I'm very grateful and happy to pass the floor to our next speaker, Minister Sarr from Senegal. Minister, it's always a pleasure to meet you. Your title is long, but allow me to read it entirely because I think it gives a sense of the kind of complex challenge you face in the balances you have to strike in a countries like yours. You are the Minister of Commerce, Informal Sector, Consumer Affairs, Promotion of Local Products and SMEs. I'm very curious to hear how you want to address all these issues under the heading e-commerce. I look forward to your intervention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me first to thank ITC for the invitation and to say thank you also to Arancha. Recently, we start in Senegal 3 initiatives around e-commerce. The first is to support our SMEs to export solutions and services on e-commerce. The second was to create a label on Senegal mango product. And the other aspect was we can support our services. Thank you, Arancha, and I think ITC is doing a very, very great job, like my colleague from Costa Rica. I would like to also to say good evening for all the speakers and to tell my pleasure to be here and to share some idea about e-commerce. I think e-commerce is now a reality. It's not, I think, a theoretical aspect. It is a reality of our life. We have e-commerce on economic aspects, but also we have e-commerce in the social, our social living. But I think we have 3 issues for government to develop e-commerce. 3 issues. I think first, it is important for me for each government to work on the business environment. It is important. Rules, how the competition is done in the country. And it is a link for me, what I'm talking about here in Buenos Aires. It is a good thing for each government in each country to work on rules on business environment. But now, I think in the world, we have also some rules to regulate and to support all this big potential economy. The first, I say, is the business environment. The second is all about infrastructure to promote e-commerce. And telecommunication, optic cable, the infrastructure, physical infrastructure, it is very, very important. The second is the social infrastructure, how to construct human capital on skills, on know-how, because e-commerce is fundamentally about skills, about human capital. And it is important for a government to support e-commerce, to focus all the political policy on how to create a very strong human capital to support this economy. The third is now how to support these SMEs. But if you take the case of Senegal, you have 99% of the enterprise who are SMEs. So that all the enterprise are SMEs. And the strategy we have to support these SMEs is we create some agency which role is to support them in international market, to support them on skills, support them on formalization. You talk about informal sector. Big issue. Many difficulties. I think in all developing countries we have informal sector. Now the strategy is how to take the maximum of the informal sector, to formalize them and to let them connect to the market. But if you take the SMEs in our country in general, in Africa in general, they have 3 problems. that Arancha know very, very well. The first is access to financing. E-commerce, it is give a possibility for SMEs to do a jump, a technology jump. You can create an enterprise without creating big physical infrastructure. The first I'm telling of problem of SMEs is access to financing. The second is access to market. How to connect these SMEs to market. And e-commerce naturally is connect with the market because we have internet, we have linkage, and the connection to the market is very, very easy. The example I'm talking with ITC, recently we have what we say the e-platform made in Senegal. We begin with ITC. This platform let a small SMEs driven by a woman or young people in a village to have his product in the world platform and to connect to customers in the United States or in Costa Rica, why not? Without moving and without creating many investment. This platform is an e-commerce platform. And it creates, at the same time, a new kind of job. A job of digitalizing the product, a job of designing the product, a job of the new marketing of product. And it is a very good opportunity. I'm telling access to the market. And the third issue for the SMEs is access to non-financial services, like skills, like education. And I think the challenge for the government is to let the SMEs accessing with no difficulties to skills, to education, and to insurance, and so on. So that, let me tell that if each government is take the big potential of e-commerce and put this potential in the heart of the policy, but it's also we have also a very big political voluntaries to develop e-commerce. You know, it is not easy. Sometimes you have some leaders who are not conscious of the importance and of the potential on e-commerce. It is important to do the promotion of the new leader to understand that it is a sector in which you can do a very great jump. You can create job without money investment. Naturally, what say my colleague from Costa Rica is very true. If you have not good product, if you are not competitive, naturally, if you have e-commerce, it will be worse. I think you must work hardly to have good product, hardly to have a good organization, and now the e-commerce is a road for you to connect and to access to the new market. To conclude about your interesting panel, I think we can't talk this panel without talking to women. As I know it, in ITC, it is a very big challenge. You know, if you take in Senegal the SMEs, 36.8% on SMEs are driven by women. This is very important. At the same time, we have a statistic also of men. They are 42%. I think women have a job to do to increase the level. But what we see when we do the statistic about SMEs, unfortunately, we see that SMEs driven by women are mostly in the informal sector. And one of the big jobs also is to support them, to follow them, to formalize, and to be very big, to have very big value add value on the SMEs they have created and in which they push many effort. What is I would like to say in unfortunately bad English, I would like to to speak perhaps in French or in Wolof in Senegal, but unfortunately, they tell me you have no translation on French and on Senegalese language. That's why I take the very bad English. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And unfortunately, we are even better than last time I saw you, Minister, because last time you were on a panel with us, we had told you there was going to be translation, and there was none. At least now you had the right information before. We can only become better at ITC. Notwithstanding this bad track record we have with you, you make my life easy by already creating the path over to the next speaker, Arancha González, Executive Director of the International Trade Center and She Trades champion. Arancha, you have the difficult position to have to add to all the many things that have already been said, but also maybe to add say something about the work ITC has ahead. We heard a lot about the hard work on the policymaker side at the national level. How do you see ITC's role in all of this?
So for us, let's say that working in electronic commerce, we ask ourselves 3 questions. And I think these 3 questions are very valid, even more valid in this context, ministerial conference of the World Trade Organization, in which we are discussing electronic commerce. First question we ask ourselves is it worth talking about electronic commerce? I mean, does it have sufficient entity that we start focusing on it? Second question we ask ourselves is there an issue? What's the issue? And the third question we ask ourselves is this something the WTO should look at? Of course, I say WTO because the International Trade Center is 50% WTO. So whatever happens in WTO matters for the International Trade Center. First question, is it worth it? Well, we looked at it, and it's a 25 trillion US dollar worth question. So we said, well, it seems to have a bit of an entity. We better look into this. But the second reason why we thought it was important that we look into this $25 trillion question is because the fastest growing part of this 25 trillion is the business to consumer part. And this is where I want to link the e-commerce discussion with the MSMEs, and in particular with the micro part, because there is a very clear link. It's the place where micros are thriving today. Is the space where you do not need this very big, complex infrastructure that trading requires to do cross-border trade. And this matters a lot because this M, the micro bit in the MSMEs, is the part that almost everybody is looking at better leveraging, because many are in the informal sector, because many are just simply not doing cross-border trade, because many are simply not contributing as they could to domestic growth. So the first answer to the question we ask ourselves as to whether this should be a priority for us or not, it was very clear. But let me, to end on this question, what we found also is that this is an area that is more and more important to the base of the pyramid, to the poorest segments of the economy, to the poorest countries in our list of countries. And since the International Trade Center deals a lot with the base of the pyramid, we clearly answered this first question. The test was, yes, passed. It's really worth looking into electronic commerce because it's a huge opportunity that can be tapped. Second question we ask ourselves is, what's the point? What's the issue? What are the issues that we need to look at? And because we are not afraid of asking, we ask business. What are the issues that you face when doing electronic commerce? Or what are the issues that you face that prevent you from doing electronic commerce? Because there's many that we ask that do not do electronic commerce. So we wanted to understand why. And the answers are summarized in this little cheat sheet that you find outside the room. This is what they tell us. So it's worth asking because you learn a lot when you ask the relevant questions to the relevant actors. Parenthesis, we did this because we saw that the discussions in the World Trade Organization were going a little bit in all directions, but not really going into the direction of asking businesses about what is it that they saw as difficulties in participating in electronic commerce. The third question is, does the WTO have to deal with this? Now, I have to be prudent here, because I am not a member of the World Trade Organization, and if I take a position, members will say, well, you're pulling the rug in somebody else's direction. But what I can tell you is that there is a trade dimension to electronic commerce. There is an infrastructure dimension. We've heard from the Minister Sarr, there is a skills and education dimension. There is a technology dimension, but there is a trade dimension. So my sense is that when you've got a $25 trillion question, when this question helps you leverage the base of your economic pyramid, when you have the list of issues that your business is telling you need to be fixed, you better make sure you discuss this in the World Trade Organization. And this is why we have been saying, without taking sides and without deciding on what the WTO should discuss or not discuss, or what they should conclude or not conclude, we are saying you would be missing a huge revolution if you didn't look into this issue. Again, it's a without prejudice, for us it's a without prejudice discussion, in that it's not one that we should be influencing, but it's one where we think can simply not be ignored given the magnitude of what's at stake. So that's what has influenced a lot of our policy work in the space of electronic commerce, trying to make for a more informed discussion in the World Trade Organization. Over and above that, obviously, the train has left the station, so we're working with many countries like Senegal to precisely fix the issues that require fixing other than trade policy, which is the space where ITC works, to support countries make the best use of electronic commerce. So I hope this, by way of not bringing any new novel issues to the discussion, I think my predecessors, the people who preceded me in this discussion were very clear, but just by way of telling you maybe why this is a discussion we have to connect with what's happening on the other side of the room, which is the World Trade Organization's Ministerial Conference.
Thank you very much. I had opened this session by saying we have a very broad representation on this panel from different stakeholders, different countries, and we have indeed also heard about many topics that are relevant for this discussion. And let me summarize some of them before I give the floor to the audience for questions. We have heard about the potential role of e-commerce for making trade more inclusive for small and medium-sized enterprises, for women, for rural areas. We have heard about the many challenges ahead, be it about payments, finance, logistics, getting things through the border, or even only going online. We have heard about institutions like the WTO having to ask themselves whether they want to enter new areas like trade in data. And we have heard from services providers about the role they can play in solving some of the issues, and about how governments engage with services providers in this. Before I invite the speakers to take a second time the floor, maybe you want to use this opportunity to ask them some questions. So I herewith open the floor for discussion, and please introduce yourself before asking your question. I would just like to know, do we have microphones for the questions? Do we have microphones for the floor? There was first a lady in the third row, and then you went, and then to the second row, and over there. Oh, sorry, we just changed the order, so the mic has good. Okay. Yes. So maybe if you would like to start.
Hello, good evening. My name is Vanessa Santos. I'm from the government of Brazil, Minister of Planning, and actually it was a brilliant exhibition. I would like to make a question to each one of you. It was amazing to take part in this. I would like to actually, firstly, to make my question to Minister Alexander from the Costa Rica. It was a brilliant exhibition. I would like to know how when was the starting point of this whole process of becoming a more digitalized economy? When was the starting point that the government realized that and started pushing reforms towards this movement of boosting digital economy?
I take a number of questions, and maybe I ask, there's a mic already over there, I think, yes? And maybe if you could pass the microphone to the lady. The question over here, yes, please?
Are you going to answer that question? Or
no, we first collect a number of questions.
Paulo Fernandez from MasterCard. I'd like to have a view from the panelists as to the role of the payment networks in enabling e-commerce. What do you see the role of that? And specifically the payment networks enabling small businesses to do cross-border commerce, because none of this is possible without the payment enablement. We've obviously been working with some of you at different levels, but I would certainly like to understand, is there something else that we can do? Is there a gap in the market that we can address?
Thank you. There was a question here in the front.
I have the mic.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
My question is for the minister from Costa Rica. I agree with you that data is key to e-commerce, but the free flow of data seems to be the most intractable issue to address. In an earlier panel, apparently the new trade deal between EU countries and Japan, this part has yet to be addressed. So my question to you is, what is your sense as to how free flow of data can happen given diverse countries' concerns about security and privacy, etc.?
Thank you. There were two more questions on this side, please.
Thank you. My name is Pedro. I'm an intern in Brazilian Competition Authority and a law student. I would direct my question to Professor Zhao, especially, but any other speaker that may feel can feel free to answer this. We know the importance of MSMEs for commerce, for the economy as a whole. And there's been already reports of some entrepreneurs accepting Bitcoins as a method of payment. So that's why I directed the question to Professor Zhao, because maybe this in China can be a clear reality, a closer reality towards that. So in your opinion, Professor, how should the micro, the small, the medium entrepreneurs react to this? Should they go on this movement? Should they wait? How should they proceed on this very same moment in commerce? Thank you.
Thank you. And one more question here.
Yes, my name is Wengo Chan from the Commerce Board of Canada in Ottawa. And I have a question for the Executive Director of the ITC. Now, you mentioned actually briefly about the she-trade. I would like to know a little bit more about that she-trade, how it works, and in particular, how they relate to e-commerce. Do you have specific projects under the she-trade program focusing on the e-commerce in some particular developing countries? Thank you.
Thank you. So if there are no further questions, I would give the floor back to the panel now. Fine. There were some questions directed to everybody. So what I will do is I give the floor back to each speaker in the order in which you intervened already. And I would like to ask you to keep your reaction brief so that everybody can take the floor again. So we started with Mr. Martins.
Thank you. Well, the first question was addressed to Costa Rica.
We don't need to follow the order,
right.
so,
okay, so
just
I'll
take anything you want to react. Also, maybe if you want to make a comment to an earlier speaker, feel free to do that.
Yeah, I certainly do want to comment on that because some very important points have been raised. Skills is key. Skills are completely key. You cannot have trade, e-commerce at national or cross-border level without skills. And the point you made opening this panel, that skills must be available for women as well, and for rural areas, poor areas, marginalized areas as well. That is key to developing commerce. The other thing is none of this makes sense if you don't have the local, national dimension of it being treated at the same time, right? And I wanted to, sorry, just address the questions how MasterCard or its peers in the market can help. I think from our perspective, they're helping a lot already. They address a part of the market that is key to distributing the payments around. There are parts of the market that seem not to have a connection with their business model. That can change. It's completely up to you. But I think you're well connected with the networks around. And I just wanted to address the data flow question. And I agree with Minister Mora that data is the center of the issue here at hand. There is no way to have cross-border electronic commerce without data flows. There is no way. And unfortunately, countries will have to come along and discuss how to harmonize views on this, because data is already circulating. This is a natural phenomenon, and it will continue on like this, and it will not help on wait on countries to make up their minds. So it is the key issue, and it needs to be addressed fairly quickly, not to be regulated in a diminishing, limiting manner, but in order to make it a tool for the development of the commerce in general, e-commerce.
Thank you, and thank you also to bring back this issue of skills. And I would like you use that point to make a comment that I noticed. While my children now learn a lot about how to use new electronic tools, I realized that I learned how to program. So we seem to be, I wonder whether we are even regressing when it comes to the skills. But Mr. Kapuria, your country is the country that will, 20 years from now, according to some simulations, produce the highest number of students with a tertiary education. Is something you want to say on this point, or any other points that were raised in the discussion or from the floor?
Right, thank you so much. What I said was, and I must start that India, and China kind of stand out in terms of the challenges that they face. So, it's not a population which is normally, it's just staggering numbers. 1.27 billion people. And it's a huge mass which requires major challenges. And that's where the advent of the only way that the bridge between the growth and reaching that growth to the last person could happen was through digitization. And I think that going forth, our leadership realized that. And that's where our government under the Prime Minister is pushing it so much that it's going through its pain. We have, I think, started seeing the outcome of that. We dropped from the GDP growth, dropped a little because of major reforms which were there, from an informal economy to a digital economy. And you're seeing huge efforts being put by the government. So each and every last village will be digitized. And getting to the last farmer, getting to the last person, remote education to the last person, because it's a huge issue. I mean, whether it's skilling, job creation, and what we call that through the digital effort, the job seekers could be job providers. By surely the let's say the MSMEs, and specifically the first M, that is the micro enterprises in each and every part of the country can actually start creating jobs and start connecting within this large mass itself. And of course, the education, which is an issue, is also getting digitized, so there's a remote learning which could happen, without really having to compromise on the quality of the education or the educators. I think the other part about I think the issue of data, and I did mention it, that that's where these are the mega drivers. Data creation, and whether it's through sensors, whether it's through any kind of devices that we are carrying in our pockets, or even from the way the things are moving from the Internet of Services to Internet of Things, because when you have sensors going into each and everything, and these sensors cost now a few cents. So they're creating data and storage of that data, which is quite free. So you get, literally mega data being stored in cloud. And then the brute power of analytics to convert it into something useful and make it intelligent, usable, intelligent data, and that's where our company is in many spheres of that sort, is making the world more connected. And not only more connected, but the cost of transactions is coming down. But security of the data is essential, and some of the regions are going overboard. For example, we make very complex transmission parts, and we supply all over the globe for automobiles. We supply to Germany, we supply to North America, we supply to Daimler, GM, Ford, etc. But when we have to send engineering data back to Germany, we have to send it through our manufacturing facility and design office in US. The reason being that India is not considered data secure. So the integrity and the security of the data is not recognized in the way it should be. So it's kind of crazy, but the harmonization is going to be the challenge going forth. So if in any way the progression needs to happen, and there are some real issues. So let's not say that nothing is unreal. There is this cybersecurity issue. And the way that, how do you make, either you secure the data in hardware bases, or how do you really make it integral to the business that you're doing? Because we in our company are doing designing and servicing. So the value chain is immense. And today, what is happening is that you really can't distinguish between services and goods. So you don't know where the value is getting generated because it's so integral part of it. How do I say which part of my value is being generated by the design that I'm doing along with my original equipment manufacturer, which is a Daimler or a GM, and which part is goods and which part is services? I really can't do that. So the realization. Yeah, I know. The last issue on the cryptocurrency, I think, in my mind, one has to wait. Thank you.
Mr. Zhao, the cryptocurrency question was asked to you, but we, again, the previous speaker made my transition easy. The term data protection, data flows has come up. Any of these topics or any other issue that has been raised in the panel, please let us know your final thoughts. Mr. Zhao.
Thank you. I think the question, I think to think about the question from two sides. One side is e-commerce. in fact, is a new sector for the national e-commerce, the national economy, because the e-commerce provides the new contribution for the economies, also provides the new working opportunities for the laborers. Another side is from the government or from the companies to think about how to make the e-commerce to make a contribution for more inclusive trade. But in China, there are a lot of population as a lot of household companies. In fact, we focus on reduce the poverty for this rural household. So they just provide some policies for the e-commerce companies, provide services for these household companies. Of course, they are not satisfied it's only with the service from the e-commerce. They hope get more service from the government, like the financial service, provide the funding and the guarantee for their trade and especially the cross-border trade. Another service is the information service, data service, as well as the education. They need the technicians to help them improve the production. And finally, also they hope get more infrastructure service to improve their situation for their production as well as living conditions. Just a brief answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister Mora, the first question was asked to you. You had to wait a long time to give an answer to it, or any other point that you want to raise in your final remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, and allow me to answer first how Costa Rica started in this. I think that in these areas you cannot improvise. I mean, you have to have a long-term plan. So Costa Rica started investing in education, before it was a republic. So we declare in Costa Rica education mandatory, compulsory, and paid by the government in 1848. And our first girls' school paid by the government was in 1856. And education was mandatory, compulsory, and paid by government for boys and girls. So we started investing very early. In the 40s, in last century, the country upgraded its platform with the idea to build up a wellness type of state. So labor rights, universal security system, pension system was declared. But we didn't have the resources to pay for that. So in 1948, the country decided to abolish the army. The way to have enough resources to pay for this big bill that we were creating was abolishing the army. And in 1981, we decided to shut down tariffs for computers. All kind of computers and computer components are free of tariffs in Costa Rica since 1981. Before, this was even thought. And just a couple of 4 years later, the government decided to introduce computing in schools, starting in kindergarten and first grade, and prioritizing on teachers. And then the next government decided to introduce English as a second language in the public system. I am the result of the public system. I have never been in a private entity, a private school. So this was the gradual process, and then of course when ITA came and when a number of possibilities came in terms of bilateral agreements, etc., then Costa Rica was always there because we need that. We need that to open up markets. So that was the idea. Regarding data, I think that what our colleague expressed about cybersecurity is key. Not all data is the same. There are sensitive data, there are personal data, there are government, public data. So cybersecurity is key. The discussion about personal data and human rights, because this somehow has to be linked, and IP, which is also a very important part. And so Costa Rica, again, was able to manage to improve in these three areas, almost at the same level. And for example, the main test we have gone through in the past months is our accession process to the OECD. So being a developing country, we decided to propose OECD to admit Costa Rica as a member. And OECD, after a long due diligence process, they say, okay, come to the OECD. So we started our accession process, which is part of what I manage in my portfolio, the coordination of this process. And guess what was the very first committee in the OECD that we approved? Trade, where all this was part of the evaluation, because our standards were already very, very high. So I think that, that's why, and I like very much what Minister Sarr expressed, because he gave us this idea about how public policy has a sort of cascade rationale, that you have to consider all these layers in this process. And you have to, of course, have some basic understanding and be advised. And in our case, for example, this lady and her team are the best advice we have had. Our trade promotion agency, Procomer, and our investment promotion agency, CINDE, are ranked #1 in the ITC rankings in the world, on top of all OECD country trade promotion and investment promotion agencies, because there is where we created the public policy to support these initiatives. And guess who is managing these two entities? The private sector. I am the chairman of the trade promotion agency, but I am one member in a board of 9 members, and the rest of the 8 members are representatives of the public sector. And then the investment authority, the investment agency, I am not even sitting there, and I am responsible for the public policy in terms of investment. But we have other mechanisms, and private sector is doing a great job because we don't have to go and ask them, these questions. They come to us, not only with the questions, but with the answers and the suggestions on how to move forward. So I think that, it's complex, but it's a puzzle that can be, put in place.
Thank you very much, Minister Sarr. Your final points, I'm afraid the mics will be put off very soon. Arancha is sitting next to you. Her speaking time depends on you. Thank you for your final points. Minister, the floor is yours.
No, I think it is a very, very interesting debate, and listening questions from public, I think it shows us the importance for the private sector in the movement on e-commerce. When government does the reform, for example, I talk about telecommunication reform we do in Senegal, to let now people creating the MVNO SMEs, mobile virtual network operator, to let some young people to be a buyer of telecommunication by taking place in the high road of telecommunication. It is a reform to create many jobs. After now, it is a private sector, and some of the issue we have and challenge we have in our country is also the dynamism of the private sector, and you must always push to have a private sector taking the opportunity of e-commerce, because the government is not it's not our job to do it. And when the reform, the context, and the dynamic private sector come to the same time in a country, is explored and you have results. And we have some example which is very, very concrete. The one I talked to with ITC, we have in Senegal an organization named Optic, where we have all the SMEs and big enterprise on technology. And until 10 years, they are exporting services, about 200 million of dollars of exportation on e-commerce technology. Without, during a long time, without any support from the government. And now, what they need is not the building or the machine. They need skills. They need to be to have certification, to have the level of the competition in the world, because they are exporting around the world. That's why I agree with the idea to have agency who are specialized to support and to follow these SMEs, this small company, to access to the international market on certification, on rules, on the needs of the customer in the world. That's why I'm very, very confident. And to conclude with what I'm telling in Buenos Aires, I think we don't afraid. We don't afraid what are happening in e-commerce, in technology, because it is a natural relation between people. But what you do from your room, you can order a ticket to go Brazil. You can order to go in the world without going anywhere. I think it is also a response, an answer for all the structure we would like during many years in the world to, I'm finding the word, to block people, to block the movement of the people. People must move because business is in the movement, business is in the relation, and e-commerce is a big tool, it's a big level for people to do business and to connect people with people.
Thank you very much, Minister, for these very positive words you choose in your closure. Arancha, the floor is yours. The final points. You are the last speaker.
So She Trades is about connecting more women to international trade. In traditional trade, out of 5 exporters, only 1 is a woman-owned company. In online trade, out of 4 exporters, 4 are women-owned. This is what our research tells us. So the first thing we know is that electronic commerce can be a big equalizer for the participation of women in international trade. What we care under She Trades is that every woman who wants to participate in international trade can do this on the same conditions as a men-owned company would, for which we have set for ourselves one target, which is connecting 1 million women-owned businesses to markets by 2020. Good news is we are very close to getting this 1 million, which means that in our next commitment would be at the end of this year to move the needle up to 3 million. Bad news is that there is 1 billion women disconnected from markets, so our efforts are small. So if you have ideas of how to scale this up, and I know some in the room are doing that, please push. Second thing that She Trades is a program of work around 7 areas: trade policies, data, government procurement, public procurement, financial inclusion, access to assets, and finally capacity building. We are starting here in Buenos Aires with point 1, which is trade policy. For the first time in the history of the World Trade Organization, we are going to put the issue of women in trade in the picture. We have put together a declaration that over 120 countries and counting have already subscribed, and we would be wanting to mark the celebration or mark the beginning of a discussion over best practices into what makes for good policies to connect women to international trade by handing over this declaration to the chairperson of the conference, Minister Malcorra, tomorrow at 5 o'clock. So tweet it. The third thing that She Trades is an online platform where which is not an e-commerce platform, is a network platform. What we have found is that women-owned businesses have less access to networks than men-owned businesses. It's a traditional issue. So we created a space, it's a cyberspace, shetrades.org, which you can all access. It's free, downloadable in your Androids, in every tablet phone you have, in which we are advising women register and connect with other women that would help you find customers, find maybe sellers, share experience, learn from each other. So please help us. SheTrades is the hashtag. And remember, it's 1 billion that we need to have in the back of our minds.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists, for this interesting discussion. A lot of food for thought and a lot of homework for all of us to change, to tweet, and more things to do. Please join me in the audience to thank our panelists for this discussion. Thank you.